art school, how we organize arts education in the United States, and how that relates to the product of this education, to the personal economies of artists, and all the implications that this has on research and policy. So I'm joined silently in the background by Brent, who is also on the steering committee of the Cultural Research Network, who's running the back end, and Bronwyn, who's going to be typing up notes and questions and helping field all of your questions. But we're really pleased that you're all here. And for future notice, or just for you to know, this virtual study group will be archived as a video along with slides for us to watch over and over again. So hopefully that is something that can be a resource for us as a group, and also to be a resource for people who weren't able to be here today. So today our topic is the future of art school, and we are joined by Caroline and Vicky from BFA, MFA, PhD, and Stephen Tepper from SNAP, the Strategic National Arts Alumni Project. So I'm just going to read their bios, and then I'll let them give about a 10-minute presentation on their recent work and the questions that they're interested in discussing with this group, and then hopefully we'll use the balance of the time, which will be about 30 minutes, for an open discussion, which I hope will get into research methods. In some of our earlier conversations on the topic, we talked about the political economy of art school and what it really means to educate people as artists, so I hope that we can have a freewheeling conversation on these topics. So about our presenters. So BFA MFA PhD is concerned about the impact of debt, rent, and the precarity on the lives of creative people. They are a collective of artists and researchers that make media to connect viewers to existing organizing work. They are a collective of artists, designers, makers, technologists, curators, architects, educators, and analysts who ask, what is a work of art in the age of $120,000 art degrees? They released a report last year called Artists Report Back, a national study in the lives of arts graduates and working artists, which I shared around to the Cultural Research Network, which sparked some interesting conversation, which is why we're here today. So thank you for participating in that conversation if you did. Our other presenter, our first presenter, is the Strategic National Arts Alumni Project, SNAP, represented by Stephen Tepper. They partner with degree-granting institutions to administer a survey to arts graduates from over 92,000 arts alumni in America. That research is comprised of an online survey. Their work is comprised of an online survey, data management, and institutional improvement systems. They're focused on using their research findings to enhance the impact of art school education. So in an email that I sent out around this topic, I linked to some questions that I'm hoping we can all ponder for this hour, as well as some of the work of our two presenters. So with that, Brett, if you could help me transfer over the presentation to Stephen, who can share a little bit about SNAP for 10 minutes, and then we'll talk to Caroline. Thanks, Stephen.
Okay. Is everybody on board? Can you hear me? I guess everybody's muted, so I can't hear you. Let me get my presentation up. Okay. Okay, so just starting here, this is just a graphical interface that SNAP has called the SNAP dashboard, which allows people to interactively engage with the data. I just wanted to start here to, so I think this is one of the more exciting ways people engage with data, and I'll give a lot of credit to, I think, Caroline and Vicky's report also used visualizations very effectively to help illuminate their insights from their research. So what is SNAP, the Strategic National Arts Alumni Project? I got involved in this project over a decade ago. It began when the Cerna Foundation had invited a number of their grantees that are part of the Talented Students in the Arts Initiative, no longer existing, but back then, who were coming together regularly throughout a few years to share common practices. And one of the things that came up in that network of universities as well as arts high schools is that institutions had very little knowledge about what their alumni were doing, how their alumni were using their degrees, and more importantly, how they might improve their curriculum and their training in order to better align with what their graduates were actually doing. It was set up as an annual survey designed to assess and improve various aspects of art school education. It investigates a number of things, including the educational experiences as well as the career paths of arts graduates nationally. And then we provide our findings both sort of in national reports, but also institutional reports to schools where they can examine their own data and they can compare themselves with peer institutions as well. I think our hope, both the BFA, MFA, PhD report and SNAP, I think are broadly driving in the same direction, which is how can art schools be most relevant and most effective in enabling our graduates to succeed in the world and in supporting artists more broadly in their work and in the ways they work in multiple environments. So again, we arts high schools, independent art colleges, and art schools that are part of larger comprehensive research universities are all part of our participants. We really began surveying in 2008 and 2009 where we had field tests. We were surveying cohorts 5, 10, 15, and 20 years out. And then in 2011, we basically locked down the core survey. We made lots of changes based on what we were learning from the field. In 2011, 12, and 13, we decided to survey all graduates, not just surveying cohorts. And that was partly because we wanted to generate enough data points for institutions, small and large. And when we were only sampling 4 or 5 cohorts, they often didn't get large enough samples to be able to make informed judgments and decisions.
I'm Stephen. This is Brent.
Stephen, this
Sorry.
is Anna. I'm curious.
9,000. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Can I interrupt you really quickly? Sorry for doing this, but we're not seeing your full presentation. We're only seeing it sort of minimized in your screen. Is there any way that you could click the full screen button so that everyone who's joining us can see your whole presentation?
So it's full screen on my, let's see here.
Either that or you could send it to Brent and he can present it for you.
Does that help? It's bigger like that?
I'm afraid we're just seeing a portion of it.
Brent, do you have any suggestions?
I think if you send it to Brent, he can put it up there for you.
Okay, I will try to send it to him.
Yeah, I guess I would do that. It worked in the run through.
Okay, sorry about that, guys. Is everybody watching me send this email? Okay. What is the, do you want me to go on or just wait for a second?
Yeah, why don't you go on and then Brent can pop up the full screen when he's got it ready.
Okay.
Sorry about the interruption.
No, glad you did. Okay, so just talking about the size of the sample now, 92,000, more than 92,000 alumni surveyed from over 162 different institutions over the last 3 years. And if you include the pilot years, we've surveyed over 100,000 graduates of arts training institutions in the U.S. And a few in Canada. And it's, just for numbers, I mean, this SNAP will soon become larger than the National Survey of Public Participation in the Arts, and it will be the largest arts survey in America, and the largest alumni survey as well. So it's an important source of information, and it's nice to see that the arts are leading in this area of surveying alumni. Okay, are we up now? Brent, who's in control of the slides now?
I'm in control of the slides, but you're still talking. So just say forward, and I will forward you as you need it.
Okay, thank you. There's an 18% institutional response rate. Some institutions are higher than that, some are lower, but that's on average. It's an online survey, and we've actually found that as alumni surveys go, the response rate is higher than average, and as online surveys go, it's also higher than average. And there's lots of debate, obviously, in the research community about response rates and how they affect answers. We early on did some bias testing to try and test the proposition that maybe those alumni who were responding to the survey were somehow systematically different from those who did not. And we basically incentivized participation with financial rewards. We allowed people to participate through multi-modality, so they could participate by telephone or by sending in the survey, and through that process, for a sample of respondents, we were able to get response rates up into the 40% range, and then we could compare that of people's whether or not they worked as artists and how satisfied they were with their experience. So more work can be done to test the possible bias, but our initial bias study suggests that there's not huge differences. Okay, next. Here are the characteristics of our sample. We have good geographic spread in terms of our institutions. We have both private and public, and we have a range. The smallest number is, our arts high schools and baccalaureate colleges, but about a fifth are special focus post-secondary institutions. Many of those are the private art and design colleges, and then a number of doctoral universities and master colleges and universities. Next. And you can see the characteristics of our sample, again, fairly well distributed, slightly older, 1983 cohorts who graduated 1983 and before. That makes sense because that's the largest age band. But you also see down here at the bottom that there's a fair amount of first generation students in our sample as well. Again, it's a pretty diverse sample that is pretty representative of the demographics of these institutions. Next. So here are some of the things we ask about: formal education degrees, their institutional experience, their postgraduate resources for them as artists and as workers, what careers they've chosen, what occupations they've worked in, how they continue to remain engaged in the arts, whether or not they're working as professional artists, issues related to their income and debt, and their demographics. And the survey takes about 30 minutes to complete, and compared to almost all other surveys of graduates, even the National Science Council's survey of recent graduates, this is so much more detailed, and I think that's one of the advantages of SNAP. Next. So what do we know about arts graduates? If you could just, there we go. 80% of alumni who intended to be professional artists when they went to art school have in fact done so. Interestingly, about a fifth of all of our graduates in our sample never intended to be professional artists. Part of that is because we include arts management majors, and arts education. But even in the studio arts and the performing arts, there is a healthy minority who are going to get degrees but never intend to be professional artists. But of those that wanted to become professional artists, 80% have been professional artists at some point in their lives. 53.6% are currently professional artists. Next. Only 4% are currently unemployed and looking for work, and that is about the same as other college graduates. 91.6% say their overall experience in art school was either very good or excellent. Next. 76% would attend their institution again. 87% are satisfied with their current jobs. This is important. 82% are satisfied with their ability to be creative in their work, and one thing we found is that this number is pretty high even for those that are in non-arts occupations. That is, most graduates figure out how to use their training in art school even in non-arts jobs. Next. And of course, this is the one that cuts against most of the mythologies that arts graduates are unemployed and or working as waiters or waitresses. Only 3% of arts graduates work in food services. Okay, moving on. I think this is important in relationship to the BFA, MFA, PhD report, which you'll hear about next, is this notion of the precariat workforce. And about 65% or more of our graduates have been self-employed or contract workers at some point. But I think the most important thing here is to recognize that arts graduates are not unique. So if the BFA, MFA, PhD had done a study of accounting graduates, they would have also found that only a small percentage were actually working full-time as accountants. So this is a survey of recent college graduates. This is not from SNAP. This is from the National Survey of College Graduates. But you see across almost every field, about 50% are no longer working in a related field within 5 years of graduation. So the arts, the fact that arts careers are precarious and they involve working across sectors, working lots of different jobs, working in and out of the arts, is really a symptom of a larger economic reality, and it's not something that is unique to artists. Okay, next. The other thing that's important is we often get hung up on trying to measure the value of a degree based on how much money you're making. And in fact, there's been a whole slew of reports and rankings recently that try to rank majors by income. And we found in SNAP that there's very little relationship between what our graduates are earning and their satisfaction with their work. And just as an example, I think this one, you can click one more time, I think we'll get some animation. If you look at dancers, one more time, they are least likely to make more than $50,000. This is in 2010, but they're also the most satisfied with their work. So again, I think it's important to just think that, income is only one way we might measure the value of a college degree, and it's typically not the primary way that graduates themselves measure the value of their degree or the value of their work. Next. The BFA, MFA, PhD report discussed debt as a major problem, and there's no question that is true. And I think this slide is important because it shows you the difference between recent graduates and non-recent graduates in terms of the amount of debt they graduated with. And you can see more than $60,000 That's gone from 4% to 14%. But in every single category, newer cohorts are graduating with more debt than older cohorts, and that's clearly a problem. Next. And it's a problem in part because it has a major impact on career decisions and what people do. So here you see the percentage of people that said that their student loan debt had an impact on their career, and the difference by different disciplines. But again, we're looking at about 25% or a third of graduates say that debt is a serious issue in influencing career outcomes. Next. I think importantly, though, we may lament employment outcomes, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people feel differently about the value of their degree. So if you look here, we're looking at a range of people in different employment statuses, and we see that the way they rate their experience at school is largely the same, with about a 9% or 8% decrease in the unemployed. So even those who are unemployed, who have the most reason to look back and say, why did I do that degree, 84% of them rate their experience as excellent or good. And again, the numbers that would do it again, so well over, even the unemployed, 64% almost, say they would go back and do that same degree at the same institution. And then recommending their degree and their institution to other students who were like them. Again, we don't see huge variation across employment status, which suggests that people see the value of that training almost independently of exactly what their employment status might be at any one moment. Okay, next. And similar to income, we see satisfaction with experience largely consistent regardless of how much income people are making. Next. And then this gets to what percentage of their income they're earning as an artist. So I think one of the issues the BFA, MFA, PhD report draws out is how many people aren't working by the census's definition as full-time artists, at least in the week prior to the census survey being administered. Again, if we think about the value of an arts degree, even those that earn a small percentage of their income as an artist are still quite satisfied with the experience they had in design and art school, and again, have high rates of saying they would do it all again if they could. So I think, if anything, this just reflects that there's not a lot of bitterness among the graduates who are responding to the SNAP survey. Their careers are divergent. They work in and out of the arts. They work full-time. They work part-time. They work across sectors. They work intermittently. They continue to do their art even if they're not professional artists. But across all of those states of being in the world, they are indicating high levels of value for what they learned and for the experience they had in art school. Next. And this just gets to some of the reasons why SNAP respondents say they stopped working as artists, or they chose not to pursue working as an artist. And we see higher pay is the most often thing that draws people out of their role as full-time professional artists. But often, about 25%, 28% say that it's just that they've changed interest, if we're just looking at the top here. Lack of access to important networks and debt. I think importantly, if you look at those last two columns, we see some of the inequality that's important for art schools to pay attention to, that white respondents, that debt influences them differently. And that's a really important point. So Black and Hispanic respondents are more likely to leave the arts as professional artists because of their debt than white respondents. And also the issue of access to networks differs between blacks and whites. Next. And more inequality here. This is the percentage of percentage who work as professional artists, and we see that men across cohorts are almost twice as likely, at least in the early cohorts, but 30% more likely later on to work as professional artists than women graduates. So, there are still major inequalities in the artistic labor force that relate to race and gender that our data is also illuminating. Okay? Is that it? Okay. So thank you for the time. Just to say that, this is, I think we found in all this data over the many years, mythologies that we've been able to undo and push back against relating to what happens to arts graduates. But we're also finding lots of ways in which institutions are coming up short, including around issues of equity, issues around debt, and importantly, issues around the curriculum not often matching actual careers that these graduates are living, specifically around the sort of itinerant careers in business and starting your own enterprise and being independent contractors. Our graduates say that they are not getting that training for the most part in their institutions.
Awesome, thank you. Super interesting. We'll get into more discussion and questions on that topic in a moment, but now we'll have Caroline and I believe Vicky speaking about BFA, MFA, PhD.
Hi, thank you so much for having us. Let me just get this presentation loaded. Okay, so you can see us?
Yeah, it looks great.
Okay. So thank you, Anna and Brent and Bronwyn and the Cultural Research Network at large for inviting us to present, and also for Stephen and SNAP for all the work that you've done. It's really important work, and we're happy to add to this discussion. I'm Caroline Woolard, and I'll be presenting today with Vicky Virgin. Also present is Susan Jahota from BFA, MFA, PhD, so she will join in during the discussion. In the next 5 to 10 minutes, I'll speak about our approach to research and our strategies for consciousness raising. Vicky Virgin will then speak about our methods and findings, and we'll close with our next steps at BFA, MFA, PhD. So who are we? As you've heard, we're visual artists, teachers, organizers, creative technologists, software engineers, curators, writers, nonprofit arts administrators, demographic analysts, performing artists, and fashion designers. We rely upon our strengths and experiences to make work that circulates in multiple contexts. Because we're working in the arts, and are arts graduates or earning artists with non-accredited arts training, we want to shape cultural policy and educate ourselves about the conditions that we face together. We're starting to recognize that our work is aligned with participatory action research. And so on this slide, you'll see a diagram made by Maria Elena Torre, who taught me at the City University of New York's Public Science Project that participatory action research is a framework for creating knowledge that is rooted in the belief that those most impacted by research should take the lead in framing the questions, the design, the methods, the analysis, and determining what products and actions might be the most useful in affecting change. We assume that all people have valuable knowledge about their lives and experiences. We have a commitment to think through the consequences of our research and actions, and our practices include the creation of multiple research products, because we actively seek out audiences who will respect and engage our research findings. And so, as you know, we ask, what is a work of art in the age of $120,000 art degrees? We're concerned about the impact of debt, rent, and precarity on the lives of creative people and on cultural production in the 21st century. We want to communicate with two populations. On the one hand, we have artists who do not often read reports, but have experiential knowledge of debt-based education. And on the other hand, we have administrators and policymakers who do read reports, but are not in open dialogue with the people represented in the statistics they read. As we know, the personal is political. So how do we, as the statistics, get administrators and policymakers to recognize and finally stop creating generations of artistic debtors? We've produced reports and videos for the web, as well as artworks for exhibitions, while attempting to shift discourse in mainstream press about the political economies of art school. We also participate in the distribution of information and lore at conferences and public events, and webinars like this one, recognizing that arts educators and art students frequent conferences, artist talks, and websites as often as performances and exhibitions. We've received international attention in The Dish with Andrew Sullivan, The Atlantic, The New York Times, and many other cultural news sites. We utilize the vernacular aesthetic of the report, as well as the interactive website and animated data visualization, because we aim to make our ideas legible to administrators, social media lovers, and policymakers who might not go to a protest or an art exhibition. And now I'll hand it off to Vicki.
Okay, hello. Thanks, Anna, for bringing us together again. Can you see me? Okay, so oh, sorry. All right. So I want to talk about our methodology. For this study, for this report that we did, we used the American Community Survey conducted by the Census Bureau. The ACS is a nationally representative statistical survey that samples 1% of the total U.S. population, about 3 million households. The annual survey gathers socioeconomic data that was formally collected on the long form of the decennial census. The variables that we are most interested in are age, race, and Hispanic origin, sex, educational attainment, occupation, field of degree, and earnings. So I'm going to take a moment and define the last three variables because that's the most important for our study. So occupation is defined by the census, is where you spent the most hours last week. If you had more than one job, there's no second job. So if you had more than one job, it's where you spent the most hours last week. The field of degree is bachelor's only, and earnings include wages as well as self-employment income. One of the most challenging issues that we encountered was how to define artists using the data collected in the survey. We chose to delineate two groups. Artists defined by occupation, and we'll call these working artists, and art school graduates identified by the field of degree. We know these categories and definitions are imperfect. For example, as I just said, data on second jobs are not recorded, and field of degree is only for bachelor's degrees. And the occupations that we've chosen, though, that will always be up for debate. But given the two groups that we have chosen, we found that there are approximately 1.2 million working artists in the U.S. in 2012. Writers, authors, and artists and related workers each account for about 1/5 of the total, followed by 18% for musicians and singers. Photographers account for another 15%, and producers, directors, 13%. For art school graduates, we count just under 2 million. Almost 40% of these art school graduates have a degree in the fine arts. Music majors account for another 24%, and drama and theater arts are 12%. So then we wanted to ask the question, what occupations are art school grads working in? And conversely, what degrees do working artists have? We found that those occupying the intersection that are both an art school grad and a working artist, there are just 200,000. In other words, 1 in 10 art school graduates are working as artists. Of the 1.2 million working artists, 16% have a BFA. So if art school graduates aren't supporting themselves as artists, what are their primary occupations? Almost 1/4 work in other professional occupations, such as managers, accountants, and CEOs. 17% are sales and office workers, another 17% are educators, 14% are not in the labor force at all, and 7% are in miscellaneous creative fields such as architects and designers. 10% make their living as artists. Now looking at the field of degree for working artists, we find that 40% have no bachelor's degree at all. 16% have a degree in the arts. And we're going to look at just a couple of demographic characteristics. Race and ethnicity we found to be really interesting. This slide shows race and Hispanic origin for the U.S. as a whole, art school graduates, working artists, and both, the group in the intersection, both an art school grad and working as an artist. We found that these three art groups are not representative of the racial and ethnic diversity in the United States, particularly for the group that is both. 63% of the U.S. is white, yet 78% of working artists are, and over 80% of art school graduates are white. 17% of the country is Hispanic, however, less than 6% of art school grads are. And blacks account for 12% of the total, but under 4% for art school grads. And the last thing that we're going to show today is gender. So while the U.S. is split evenly between males and females, females make up 60% of art school grads, but only 40% of all working artists. And of the 200,000 who are both art school grads and working artists, males account for 55% and females are 45%. So I'm going to turn it back over to Caroline to talk about what next steps.
So one of the things that we can talk about in the discussion, we hope, is that as a group that aims to raise consciousness, we are more and more invested in participatory action research and in the idea that we have to be responsible to this rhetoric of impact, where people are concerned with value only equated in terms of tuition and future earnings as a kind of measurement in the cultural value debate. And so we at BFA, MFA, PhD recognize our power to shape public discourse at this moment. So we're engaged in deep discussion as a group to determine the most urgent questions to ask between earning artists, arts graduates, working artists, and people with arts training that's not accredited. So we welcome any and all feedback from you about quantitative and qualitative research, as well as possible partnerships. If anyone on this call is interested in working with us, we are an open collective or group, and we're interested in sharing our data. You can find it on our website at bfamfaphd.com, and you can email us if you'd like to give us feedback or work with us. So thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. So maybe, Brent, you can also put Stephen up on the screen. Really interesting conversation to be had from both of you, and I want to welcome others who are on this call. In the little control panel up on the right, there's a little thing that says raise hand. It should be like a high five. So if you have a question and you want to express it and ask it verbally, you can click the raise hand button, and we'll take your question. You can ask it verbally, or there's also a field called questions where you can type your question. So while everyone on the call comes up with their excellent questions, they're burning questions for these researchers, I wanted to just ask a question to both BFA, MFA, PhD, and to Stephen. You both talk about looking at the different ways that we value the arts. So Stephen had some really interesting data points about how arts graduates are extremely satisfied with their experience in art school, irregardless of their employment situation. And I think that's also something that you talk about, Caroline and co, is finding different ways to express the value of an arts education. So I'm curious if you guys can both just take a moment to sort of answer that question. What other values do you think art school imbues upon its participants, if not economic, and how do you express that and measure that?
You guys want to go
Stephen.
first? Me? Okay.
Something we wrote recently, a piece called On the Cultural Value Debate, to try and respond to this misperception of our report as one that understands impact or value only in terms of future earnings, which is not the way we thought our report would be understood. And in our next major initiative, we will be careful to be clear that for us, impact is not only measuring future earnings. So for us, absolutely, it's the value of an art degree is one that fosters critical thinking, that builds community, helps people refine craft and sense the agency around their own labor. And in terms of measuring it, we are more and more interested in qualitative interviews to try and tease out the lives that people lead with dignity while bearing the brunt of student debt and unemployment.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that you know, that we've kind of when they added the question of major to the current population survey, I don't think anyone could have anticipated the unintended consequences, which is that all these folks jumped in to start ranking majors by their earning capacity and by their employment status. And you know, unfortunately, metrics are like are a gravitational pull. They're the easy thing to sell web pages on. I mean, you can't have. Apparently, we can't have enough rankings in our culture at the moment. So I think the arts have gotten kind of ground up in this debate. In an unfortunate way, because everything we know about pedagogy and learning suggests from the learning sciences suggests actually the way art students are engaged in learning is actually how people learn generally. That we need to actually be spreading arts pedagogy more broadly across the university system, rather than saying the arts is somehow separate or the arts is somehow fringe or something only for elite. That the kind of reflective practice, the project-based work, the close mentorship, the ambiguity in assignments, all of this stuff is so critical to creative competencies and critical thinking. Very expensive because of that pedagogy. But if we can figure out how to deliver that pedagogy more cost effectively so access is increased and debt is reduced, you know, this is really the future of learning. I think, you know, in some ways, the precariat workforce, the better measure is not unemployment at any one time, but how long does it take someone to get reemployed, right? Because we're going to be, all of us are going to be unemployed at greater frequency periodically. And I think there's something about the way artists are trained that allow them to seize opportunities, to be plucky, to figure out a way to pivot in their own creative work and lives to find and bridge to new kinds of work and experiences. And again, I think that's part of the whole value proposition that you get from this kind of training. And so we need to be thinking about how we disseminate and share and become the model for pedagogy in the 21st century instead of being seen as some expensive exception.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from our audience from Ann Gadwa. Hi, Ann. Ann asks, for Stephen, has the BFA, MFA, PhD findings changed SNAP's approach moving forward, and if so, how?
It's such an important report in so many ways, and there's so many areas of convergence between what we're finding and what that report mentions. You know, we just had a meeting of our board, the SNAP Advisory Board, and I think one thing that came up in that conversation was what institutions are doing to support artists in their communities that don't have a degree from a higher education institution. So I'm not sure if that conversation would have happened in the absence of their report. I mean, I think that's one of the things that they have really raised is that there are lots of people working with artists who don't have an arts degree. I will say that it also has raised this, I think, urgent research question, which is what is the difference? So if you do not have an arts degree and you're trying to make your life as a creative person, what are the disadvantages you face? So we know all the research that's coming out on the value of any college degree is showing that there's wider and wider gaps between those with college degrees and those without. And so what does that look like in the arts? Because you know, I don't think the answer is that fewer people should go to college when a college degree is more important now than it's ever been. So you know, I think it's also opened up that question. And you know, I think interestingly, I want to know who all those artists are working that don't have college degrees because they're not in my radar, right? And you know, I think we need to sort out the sort of the wheat from the what's
chaff.
the other chaff? Thank you, from the chaff, because the Census Bureau is not it doesn't do a great job of capturing of the nuances of occupation. So who are those non-college graduates working in artistic occupations that show up on the census? Are they people in entertainment in Las Vegas? Are they visual artists working in New York? You know, I think we need to do a lot of work now to figure out what makes up that big piece of the pie in the BFA, MFA, PhD report, because they're not all working as artists in our social circles. They could be, and we need to know more about these other ecologies of creative work that are outside of our radar screen.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Do you have a response to that, Caroline, or can I? I think it's interesting that yeah. And I think that's maybe one of the benefits of a group like BFA, MFA, PhD is that they're getting into questions that specific data sets that have benefits because they're really focusing on a specific population of arts graduates can raise, which is great. Let's see, we have a couple of other questions. One is from William Roseberry. As regard to choice of careers for arts graduates, I wonder if available benefits such as health, retirement, etc., and professional expenditures, supplies, studio rent, equipment, further education might be as pertinent to question as potential income. Did I read that correctly? Maybe you can ask this, William Roseberry, if you'd like to ask this question as with your voice. Maybe that might be a little more clear. Brent, maybe you can help me unmute this person.
You are unmuted, William, if you were there.
Okay.
I think I know what he's saying.
Okay.
It should be more of a statement than a question, though. I think he's saying that the career paths that are available to artists are ones that don't often provide a pension or supplies, and therefore they are less traditionally stable. So people are precarious even if they're successful in the arts. I think that was a statement.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think there's an amazing opportunity. I don't know what the new forms for collective action will look like, but you know, the post-industrial economy is shifting all the risks to the backs of workers, right? So this kind of contract work means that healthcare is shifting to workers. It means that companies, when they have to deal with intermittent workflows and they absorb that cost, now individuals are absorbing that cost in their own project work. And so, you know, to live as a creative worker, but really in many other areas as well, you are, you know, there's no steady source of support or income. You're going to go up and down. And what collective formations can we envision, especially as unions are declining, both in the arts and elsewhere? What's going to take their place as ways to socialize the risk that we all take on our backs as individual artists and workers? And you know, there are boutique projects that are, you know, that are sharing risk and are pooling resources, But I don't think we've come up with a robust sort of cultural policy approach to that question yet. And I think that's an exciting moment because we could maybe lead the broader economy, sort of the canary in the coal mine. I think artists have been doing this longer, and their unions shrank faster. And so I think we might be the ones to figure this out first.
Absolutely, and I'd say in our report at the end we focus on what's called the solidarity economy internationally, sometimes the social and solidarity economy, sometimes the workers economy, and it's based on principles of cooperation and democracy and sustainability. Some people even just call it the new economy, but we're impressed more and more by producer and consumer cooperatives, so groups that pool their tools and also sometimes contract work with expensive clients as a cooperative and then save an excess pool for themselves for healthcare, for $20,000 cameras, and for independent projects. And there are many ways, even in the so-called creative economy, where you can see people voting for the future of what they call platform cooperativism. So the antidote to something like Uber would be a cooperative taxi service. And what you need in order to do that is cooperative investment. So now people are talking about investment cooperatives as an alternative to venture capital. And I think the issue for us is that it can't all come from individuals. We also need to see groups like the NEA, and I know Laura Callahan is interested in this, supporting with policy cooperation between artists so that it doesn't only come out of all of our pockets.
And then also, how does that get reflected in pedagogy in school? What are we actually teaching our students to do? So could we, in fact, offer courses in how to set up worker-owned businesses or cooperatives?
Yeah, I love that. Come help us design those courses.
We are working on it. We actually have a collective of educators in 15 schools who share syllabi called the Pedagogy Group, and it's mostly on the Northeast at the moment, but many people have been excited and talked about spreading this model.
Super.
Yeah. So I wanted to give you guys each an opportunity to ask each other questions, since I know that you've responded to each other's work perhaps in writing, but I think this might be the first time that maybe you've met or talked. Which is really exciting that we can provide that platform. This is great. I feel like the Brady Bunch right now. So I just wanted to give you guys an opportunity if there's any questions that you have for each other's methods or challenges that you've each had. Questions that you have for each other.
I don't know, I'm sure we all have questions, but one thing I've been wondering about is how or when or if your data for SNAP would become open source or open access, Stephen, so that groups like ours that don't have the funds, we're not an institution of the size that many of the ones who work with are, how could we access it? How could other groups access it to make comparisons across data sets?
Yeah, so I hope I'm not a policy decision here. I know Sally's on the line, our director of SNAP. So, currently the data is made available for a fee, and the fee covers the cost of preparing that data, the analysts that have to work on that. But I would say that we will consider if someone can't pay the fee, our goal is for people to use the data and to work with it. So, maybe we need to create a policy that's more clear about what constitutes what would be a hardship case, someone who's not in an institution that has access to the resources to pay for the data. And it's not a lot. I think it's somewhere around $500. But that is a lot for those that don't have research funding or funding to access research. So yeah, I think we should our principle is the more people that can write about it and use the data, the better it is for the field. And we have some costs associated with making that data available, but I think we can try to cross-subsidize those costs if there are people who don't have the resources. So, I might ask, I think one of the interesting, all of this kind of, any of us face is the notion of success. So when we were developing the SNAP survey,
Could you say the definition of what?
yeah, I just wanted to say I'd be interested to know your reactions to how artists respond to the research you're doing as it relates to their own sense of value and success as artists. Because one of the challenges we had when we were designing our study is there were so many ways we could ask a question that gave the respondent the idea that study excludes so many different ways in which people work as artists, and think about what it means to be successful. Is working full-time as an artist and being able to support yourself through that work financially, is that what success we're aspiring to? There are multiple notions of success, and how do you in your own work going forward want to communicate the idea that there are many routes to success for someone doing creative work?
Well, I see it as a researcher that, I mean, every data source that you work with has got caveats, and the idea is to know that and understand that really well. And so, for example, I think the data that comes out of the census is, I mean, we could kind of see it as a marker, a starting point. I mean, it's a given. It's something that we can track. So it's what it is, and we know what it is, and we know what the problems are, but it still is what it is. And then the next step is to try to inform that with other types of things, like your survey, qualitative research, and to me, that's the path forward in the research. It's not to throw it out because it excludes all these other kinds of workers. It's to accept it for what it is. These are people that spent the majority of their time last week working as an artist. That's something, and it's something that, you know, then that's one group. Now how can we access and learn more about the other groups?
Yeah, I think for us, what we wanted, it is a very sensitive topic, the idea of who is an artist, especially because so many people give up so much in order to protect themselves as artists and defend themselves as artists to their family and friends. And so we've wanted to shift our term working artist to earning artist, because it often is confusing. Many people are practicing artists, but they would call themselves working artists. So that term, the working artist, is one that it has hurt people, and we will change it because of that. But I'd say, again, you know, it takes a very long time to get a self-initiated survey out, such as SNAP, and to then have 18% response rate, which is good, but still, you know, it's very hard to survey the whole field, and that's what we all have wanted to do. I co-founded a service organization for artists, and for years we were trying to figure out how many people we could serve, and it's very hard to know. So using the ACS is one way to get at that number, and a self-created survey with the own issues of self-reported bias that you spoke about is another way. I think we'll continue to try and find working artists who do not have accredited degrees, because this is something that came out from the data when we looked at the ACS that we were not expecting. And my fear with a proliferation of interest in self-made surveys and self-reported data is that the sample sizes are very small. I'm not even talking about SNAP, I'm talking about in New York City among our peer groups. Many people want to make their own survey, and we always ask them to consider using existing data sets and to connect with researchers like you all on this call to make the existing work visible rather than recreating the wheel. So I guess the quick answer is we are very sensitive to the terms we use, and we hope that we can join up together rather than creating more surveys because they don't have enough responses. And there are so many artist groups in New York City alone creating their own surveys right now when they could just be filling out yours.
And it's also made more complicated by by defining success. What does success constitute?
Right.
Is it speculative success? Is it selling work in the marketplace? And that feeds back into pedagogy, because some of the myths that we tend to reproduce in art schools are that, in fact, you know, you'll leave art school, you'll move to New York, and you'll be able to make a living as an artist selling your work. Well, what are the other measures of success? So I guess in that way, you know, thinking about PAR research, more qualitative forms of research, that we can maybe tease out some of these nuances.
I
It's
have
so
another.
important.
Okay, sorry, keep going. Sorry.
That's such an important point.
So I think, yeah.
Yep, I'm sorry.
Stephen, go ahead, and then I think we'll have to. No, please respond, and then we're at time, unfortunately.
Okay, what our students perceive success to be makes a huge difference, and they close out all kinds of opportunities because the faculty and the culture we create in art school says there's only one thing you can do, and I think that reduces their occupational imagination. We know that the most happy graduates are those that actually go and teach, and yet teaching is probably perceived as not successful when you're in art school, but in fact is the pathway that many artists take. And many of those educators don't show up in the census data because they're considered educators, not working artists, but they are teaching art.
But actually, even that's changed, because there are so many speculative practices now, because in order to get tenure as an artist teaching at the college level, you have to have major exhibitions, you have to have exhibitions in major venues, and so you're subjected to some of the same kinds of pressures that you would be if you were just actually circulating within the art market. It's really not that different anymore, because the capacity to get tenure, I mean, it's shrinking and shrinking. There are so few tenure track jobs that you have to be, you know, sort of almost an art star to be able to get a teaching job, a tenure track teaching job anymore. So
I want to offer that we have lots of really great questions that are remaining from all of our participants that relate to these important questions of methodology and research, and I think it's fitting that we should end on that topic since this is a cultural research network. We're going to archive this whole conversation. We're going to put all of the questions answered and unanswered that we received from the participants up on the listserv, and I just want to thank you guys for having a really interesting and provocative set of presentations and conversations, and I'm glad that we could facilitate this meeting.
Thanks for doing it.
thank you.
Yeah. And for all of you who are listening, we do these virtual study groups as often as there is demand, and we take suggestions for topics that you want to cover or talk about as a group. So please send your suggestions to the steering committee.
Great. Thank you.
Hope everyone has great days. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.